Anyway, I got something to say right now. I've been thinking. The Last of Us Part 2. Is such a great video game. It's such a great video game because it doesn't have a happy ending. And it's not just the hero versus a villain type story and the good guy wins at the end. Let me tell you a story. A trip that let me tell you a trip down memory lane. On Buffy the Vampire Slayer, she doesn't always have a happy ending. On the first season, she dies. She loses against like the evil ancient vampire, the old vampire. She loses against him in one of the best seasons ever because she dies at the end and she loses and the villain wins. That's a lot more convincing story, and it's a lot more realistic because in real life one person doesn't always win. The Last of Us 2, Ellie and Joel lose. I like that the main character Joel gets killed by Abby and she gets her revenge. I like the fact that Abby beats up Ellie. I like the fact that she beats Ellie, and I also like the fact that she doesn't die in the end. I love the way that Neil Druckmann wrote The Last of Us and the complexity of the whole situation. I mean, nobody was mad when Danny Phantom ended, and that was ended on a sour note. Danny Phantom was a sad story, and it was a very sad story at the end. Danny Phantom, the cartoon on Nickelodeon, y'all know what I'm talking about. Y'all watched Nickelodeon and Cartoon Network growing up, and Danny Phantom ended on a sad note, and I still feel like Danny Phantom was really good, and nobody was really complaining when that show ended and the villain won. So, I mean, for Christ's sakes, Danny Phantom became evil. He's fighting in for those of y'all that ain't never watched Danny Phantom, in the season finale, or the supposed to be season finale, but in the season finale, Danny Phantom actually becomes evil. He's fighting his future self that becomes evil because of something bad that happened in his life. It's something bad that happened in his life in his I guess in his like past or whatever, like in his like future, right? Like in his past, but not like deep in his past, like in the future, but like a couple of years from after he graduates, right? Like I think it's actually, I can't remember if it's before he graduates, after he graduates high school, or I think it's when the day he does graduate high school, something bad happens, and I think he loses all his friends and family, and they die because he wasn't able to save them, and he turns evil, and that's he's fighting his future self. That's the him he's fighting, and he fights his future self, and his future self wins, and he's a what do you call it? He's a villain basically. So he's fighting his future self, and it's a villain. And the good Danny Phantom, the present day Danny Phantom, that's a teenager, that's a senior in high school. He actually uh loses the fight against his evil self, against his future self, because he's so much more powerful because he got all these newfound abilities. So, so basically what I'm saying is nobody was sad. I mean, people were sad, but y'all were okay with that ending of Danny Phantom and that storyline, and it was sad. So why is everybody so shook up over The Last of Us Part 2? The Last of Us Part 2 was the best story ever told in a video game. So that's kind of what I have to say on it. And another thing, this is another thing I got to say on it. People that are mature will like The Last of Us Part 2. And those kids, that's what I like to call them, the adults that don't like The Last of Us, kids, because they got a child mind. Those people, those kids, they don't like The Last of Us Part 2 because they want like a Spider-Man story of good versus evil. And what they want is they want the hero to win all the time at the end to beat the villain, and that's just a boring story. It's so cliche, and he could have easily told that story. He could have easily played it safe, but he didn't. I like the fact that he introduced Abby and the WLF, because that shook everything up. The WLF shook everything up. The WLF and Abby, her being introduced to the story, shook everything up. And that's the reason. That's one of the reasons I like it. And of course, that they had a sad ending with Joel dying, being killed by Abby, of course, with a baseball bat, and Ellie not being able to play the guitar because she lost her fingers when Abby bit them off at the end of the game in that fight that they had when they was at that slave plantation. And another thing I want to say, people that like those stories, the superhero, like Spider-Man stuff, that's just childish. That's not profound. That's nothing new. That's just playing it safe. And I don't want to see just another story with Ellie and Joel going on an adventure together, because that would be boring. I'm glad that I saw something different and something new. So I guess that's pretty much all I got to say. Yeah, that The Last of Us is the greatest video game story ever told. I'm trying to think of something else to say. I don't know, man. I guess like the old way of thinking, the old way of telling stories is kind of boring and outdated. I like the new way. I like the new way that Neil Druckmann told that story. I really do love The Last of Us Part 2. And I do believe The Last of Us Part 2 is the greatest video game of all time. So, yeah, that's it.